Well, it's Friday. It's a little early, but we have a lot to talk about because the NFL released the schedules late last night, and we already knew, as we talked about the other night on the show. We already knew who the Bengals were playing. We knew where those were going to be, but we didn't know venue. We didn't know the order, any of that. But we now do, and there are some very, very intriguing matchups and ebbs and flows to the schedule, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to take your questions on this episode, so it's a little listener questions live / talk about the schedule. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined as always by my guy John Sheeran. John, another one of those benchmark days on the NFL calendar has come and gone, and we're going to talk about it.
And now what's left? We got some practices we have like a little bit more than that, like 10 practices until late June, and then absolutely nothing. So, yeah, got 4 months to go until some of the stuff actually starts to happen.
Yep, and we know that the rookies have all received their numbers. So there's some interesting ones in there, namely Chuck Sizzle getting Chris Henry's old number, 15. So that's pretty interesting there. But a lot of things happening, and let's get to the schedule a little bit. And like I said, we'll be taking your questions. You can get those to us in a number of ways. You can email theobinsider@gmail.com. You can hit any one of us up, whether it's the show Twitter account, Cincy Jungle's Twitter account, John or my personal Twitter accounts, up with some questions. You can leave them in the live comment sections on Facebook and or the Orange and Black Insider YouTube channel. So leave those there. And then, of course, you can hit us up just a number of different ways. Get them to us. Comment threads on Cincy Jungle. We got a lot of different ways. So we'll be piling a few of those up and going over those in just a little bit. But I'm going to share. This is the official graphic from the Cincinnati Bengals and their Twitter account. We're going to share this here. And then, of course, we also know the preseason deal here. So we'll get the things that don't matter as much out of the way. Preseason game number 1, they are hosting the Green Bay Packers. Preseason game number 2, they are at the Atlanta Falcons and seeing their old pal Jesse Bates there. And then preseason game number 3 is at Washington. I already see a question about preseason playing and all that, so we'll probably address that one in just a little bit. But here is the order. And week 1, the Bengals go to week 1, they
go to Cleveland.
Yeah. They go to Cleveland. And then they host home opener, the Baltimore Ravens, the following week. Then Monday Night Football, they host the Los Angeles Rams. Then they are at Tennessee week 4, at Arizona. So you're going 2 different corners of the country here. At Tennessee week 4, at Arizona week 5, pretty tough there. Then they host Seattle, have the bye week 7. Week 8, they take on the San Francisco 49ers away there. Then they are on Sunday Night Football the following week, another primetime game with the Buffalo Bills for week 9. Then they host the Houston Texans week 10. Week 11, they are at the Baltimore Ravens for a Thursday night showdown. We talked a little bit about predictions for that. Similar to last year, I think, as well, with a Thursday night game against the Ravens. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, they host them week 12 at the Jacksonville Jaguars week 13. Week 14, they host the Colts. Week 15, they host the Vikings. Week 16, they are at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Week 17, they are at the Kansas City Chiefs. And week 18, they host the Cleveland Browns. So they start and end the season, John Sheeran, with the Cleveland Browns. So let's break it down. I mean, we don't have to talk too much about the preseason games, I don't think. But really, for me, I thought that first month of the season, that there's first 4 games, and then I talked about how you're going from one corner of the country to the next corner of the country back to back, going to Tennessee in week 4 and then at Arizona in week 5. But that first, starting at Cleveland, and then you've got the home opener the following week against Baltimore, back-to-back divisional games, Monday night game against the Rams, and then at Tennessee. That could be a tricky, a tough first stretch for the Bengals here in the first month.
Yeah, so normally the Bengals don't host, or they don't play the Browns week 1. That hasn't happened since the beginning of the Andy and AJ era back in 2011. Do you remember in that game, AJ Green caught a game-winning touchdown, not from Andy Dalton, but from Bruce Gradkowski of all people. So that's the first time in a while. And by playing the Ravens in week 2, it's the first time they opened up against back-to-back AFC North opponents since 2012, when they also played the Ravens and Browns to start that particular season. So yeah, it's the whole season is just sandwiched between two games against the Browns, which could be viewed as a positive, I think, for some people, because week 1 is always kind of this random variable. It's essentially an extra preseason game, and the Browns have typically given the Bengals some troubles. So maybe that extra wild cardness, or just I don't know, volatility and unpredictability of that week, it might play into the Bengals' favor. And obviously, like, week 18 may not matter for either the Browns or the Bengals, so that's going to be interesting as well. But like you said, there's some interesting travel schedules here. You go to the West Coast to face Arizona, then you have a West Coast team coming here in Seattle, and then you have a bye, and then you go back out to the West Coast for San Francisco. And obviously, I don't see like a stretch here where it's like an obvious, like, oh, this is like a cupcake part, this is like a tough gauntlet necessarily.
Yeah.
It's kind of all mixed in between. And of course, these are takeaways in May, and things can obviously change once the season starts. But Anthony, I think the biggest takeaway for me is you have a week 7 bye, and for the past 5 years, they've exclusively had either week 9 or week 10 buys, which has been obviously very beneficial. The more closer to the middle of the season, the better. So week 7 bye is a little bit on the early end, and that could be detrimental, because if you don't get a bye week in the postseason, you make it all the way to the conference championship again, that's 14 consecutive games that you have to play. But I think the timing here works honestly in their favor, because playing San Francisco and Buffalo back-to-back is about as tough of a 2-week stretch as you can get. They're two of the only 4 teams that have higher Super Bowl odds than the Bengals right now. So getting that extra rest before you have to travel out to the West Coast, maybe they can impact their travel schedule by going out there a little bit early, because they have the time off, and then having that time off to face a team like San Francisco and then facing Buffalo. Zach Taylor's 4-0 in the past 2 years in the 2 weeks following the bye in 2021 and 2022. It's a far cry from what it used to be under Marvin Lewis and their post-bye week blows. So I think that honestly kind of works into their favor. It's a very timely bye, even though it's a little bit on the early side.
It's an interesting observation on your part, in that, the perceived weaker teams on the schedule there's not really a back-to-back. If you remember last year, that was what was it? The Falcons and the Panthers. I mean, there was kind of a string of teams there where you're like, okay, let's get this thing back on track after the slow start to the season. Here, I mean, your perceived weaker teams are maybe the Rams. But I mean, they're still, they've got a good coach and Stafford, and I mean, there's some talent there. But maybe the Rams. The Cardinals seem to be a bit in a rebuild mode, even though they have Kyler Murray. The Texans, obviously, because of where they picked and how they finished last year. The Colts kind of in there. And if you see there, I mean, the Rams and the Cardinals are 2 games within 3 weeks of each other. But like we said, the Bengals would be traveling to Tennessee and then all the way to Arizona. By the way, gorgeous time of year in Arizona, early October. For those looking to go to a road game, I would highly recommend that. But at any rate, it's an interesting point, though. There's not kind of the back-to-back weaker teams. I mean, you said it here, out of the bye at San Francisco, then you host Buffalo for a Sunday night game. You get the Texans there, and then, oh, by the way, right after the Texans, you go to Baltimore, and then you host Pittsburgh. So there's not a lot of respites in this schedule. There's not a lot of breaks, or a string of games where there's in even some people you go, well, maybe there's some questions about the long-term viability of the Jaguars after last year. Okay. Some people wonder just how good the Minnesota Vikings are after last year, but I mean, they won a lot of games last year. So, and then you look, for me, John, you look at that last month of this, the first month of the schedule is kind of tricky. This last month of the schedule is really, if the Vikings are for real, if the Vikings can sustain success, say that one 5 times fast. Minnesota Vikings. Then you go to Pittsburgh, and no matter what we always say about the Pittsburgh Steelers roster, what we think it's going to be, how bad we think they're going to be, we said this last year, and somehow they're right in the thick of things still at the end of the year. So you have the Vikings, you go to Pittsburgh, then you go to the Chiefs, and then you got to wrap it up with the Browns. The Browns, never an easy game, regardless of how good or bad they have been in recent years. They seem to always give the Bengals fits. So that last month of the year is also a really tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't take any one of those teams lightly. Like, who knows what the Colts are going to be? Like, I guess that's a good starting point to get some momentum entering December. After you go to Jacksonville, like they don't have a lot of primetime games in Jacksonville this late this season, so that's obviously a new development for them, and obviously a well-earned one based off of how well they did last year. So that's one of these 4 primetime games that they have right now. And do you want to rank like your favorite like primetime games out of these 4? Because I have
I'm gonna pull it up. I'm gonna pull up a separate thing here because I think there is a maybe there is, or it hasn't. Has it gone up yet on Cincy Jungle? Maybe it's in the queue and ready to go. Well, regardless, we can still show this. So the primetime games, and obviously we are talking about, and I'm gonna see if I can make this a little full screen here. You don't need to see our ugly mugs as much as the schedule here, so we'll try and make that the deal. But okay, so your primetime games here, as we've said a couple of times, you've got the Monday night against the Rams. You've got Sunday night, and granted, they are both of these first 2 are home. So Monday night against the Rams in week 3, Sunday night against the Bills at home, week 9. Then you've got a Thursday night, week 11 at Baltimore. And then you've got another Monday night, the interesting one here because they're pitting Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow together, week 13 at, so 2 home, 2 on the road. Let's hope the Bengals, for a variety of reasons, get to keep all of their primetime games as opposed to what happened last year. So 2 and 2, 2 at home, 2 on the road. To me, I guess if you're ranking them, I think the Buffalo game tops the list for me. Because there's going to be just heightened emotion. It's going to mean a lot, I think, for the conference, conference standings and everything. Obviously, the emotions attached to it based on what happened in that primetime slated game last year. The Bills are going to be looking for revenge as well because of how badly they got beaten at home in the playoffs by the Bengals last year. So that one's tops for me. I guess I may put the Jaguars at 2 over the Ravens. And I say that because Thursday nights are always, they tend to be sloppy. And they tend to, the Ravens Bengals game, I think I mentioned a primetime game last year, and I may have misspoke saying that was a Thursday night. It might've been a Sunday night game, against the Ravens last year, but regardless, there wasn't a lot of points scored in that one either. What was that one? 19-16 or something. So 17-16, something like that. So I just feel like that has a propensity to, even though it'll mean a lot, it might be just a sloppy game. And so that one may be a close third behind the Jaguars for me. And then, the Rams, I know obviously there's the Super Bowl storyline and everything, but it's an interconference game and it's early in the season. So I don't know how much that'll mean in terms of comparative to those other 3 AFC games in primetime.
I'm going to ask you a favor and just take a step out of my mind because you were just completely in it for the past couple minutes there. We are 100% lockstep in agreement here. And I thought the debate was going to be like, is the Ravens game or the Jaguars game more enticing? Just because obviously the AFC North implications. But you're right. Like, I feel like if that game was on Sunday night or Monday night and it was the first of these 2 meetings following what happened in the playoffs, I think there would be more. There'd be more intensity. I'm not gonna say it's not gonna be intense, but I feel like it would be an even more enticing matchup if it was the first meeting after what happened in the playoffs this past January. So it knocks it down a little bit because of that. And I think people are definitely underrating how good the Jaguars are going to be again this year. I think they're going to obviously contend for the AFC South title. And I think that game's going to be a high quality game. Obviously the Bengals have shown to be highly competent in December. I think Joe Burrow's only lost like 2 or 3 games past like the beginning of December in his entire career. So obviously there's that, and Trevor Lawrence is going to take another step. I think that offense is going to have Calvin Ridley in it. The Jaguars are going to be good, and that's a really enticing matchup there. And we got Dan the Man in the comments, who's always dropping knowledge on us. He's right. The Pittsburgh Steelers Week 16 game and the Kansas City Chiefs Week 17 game, those are more or less prime games too. Not just because they're 4:30 and it's going to be dark by the time December rolls around, but they are nationally televised games with like isolated broadcasts. They have both
Right.
CBS's flagship broadcasting crew and Romo and Nance doing the game, and you only get scheduled games if the league feels like you're going to be in contention for high seeding in the playoffs. And obviously, the Bengals have these past 2 years have shown that's the case. So to me, the Bengals technically have like 6 primetime games, which is the absolute max that you can have. But in terms of like actual nighttime primetime games, they have 4, which I believe is like 8th or 10th in the league or something like that.
Yeah. So we talked on Wednesday, and this is maybe going back a topic that we just talked about, stepping out of the primetime game thing a little bit, but still kind of touching on it. Here's what we talked about: tricky games that could provide a hiccup, games that could be, just, and we obviously, because of where they picked and everything and the quality draft and the high impact players they got in this year's class, the D'Amico Ryans hire, et cetera, you go to the Houston Texans. Here's the problem with where this game for me sits. This game could very well be one of the most frustrating watches by the Bengals as a Bengals fan. And here's why. You go to San Francisco, marquee game. You host the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night. And then, a week and a half after the Buffalo Bills game that you're hosting on a little over a week and a half later, you've got to go to Baltimore for what is sure to be a big divisional matchup. And squeezed in between 2 primetime games, 2 huge games for AFC playoff implications, most likely, is this Texans game. You're home for it as the Bengals, but my God, that is squeezed. As I continue to look at this, that is squeezed in an area where this team does not, have that in its DNA really about overlooking teams or whatever, playing down to competition. We've seen it before in years and years ago, maybe more in the Marvin Lewis era at times, but this screams trip-up game to me, just based on where it's slated and the opponents that it's sandwiched around. I do not like, at first blush, I just don't like where that game is situated on the schedule.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Like, would you rather that be like a perennial powerhouse or a team that you could potentially overlook because they're not as good? I think another reason, like the Texans are just bound to be a little bit better at some point. Like, I think D'Amico Ryans, like we both agree, he's going to be a good head coach. CJ Stroud could find his footing pretty early on. Will Anderson's bound to make an instant impact. Like, they're going to be better than what they have been ever since everything that happened with Deshaun Watson. So I don't expect them, obviously, to be like a major contender for the playoffs, but they'll probably win like 5 or 6 games this year, which is an improvement over what's been in recent years. So yeah, it's never going to be. I don't foresee that as like a 3-score win for Bengals unless they just happen to bring it that day, which they obviously could.
Yeah. What other specific games, either tricky or ones where you're like, hey, this initially looked tough, and now that I look at the schedule setup, maybe my mind has changed on how tough that game? I mean, either way, do you have some other games you're pointing at in those respects?
I think the Titans, like I'm not going to say the Titans are great by any means, but they're like the AFC South version of the Steelers to me. They're always going to be like around 500 at the very worst, even if like Ryan Tannehill does very little for me. I think week 4 is a little bit too early before Will Levis will probably play over Ryan Tannehill. I have no idea what that whole process is going to be like, if he's going to be starting for week 1 or if he's just going to be redshirted this year. So I'm very ignorant to that whole situation. I'm just going to assume that that's going to be Tannehill playing, and it's always competitive, Bengals and Titans. Even if the Bengals are the more talented team, I think this is like the 3rd consecutive game that they've been at Tennessee. They went to the playoffs there a couple years ago. They played pretty close last year and late in the year. So now you have them in the first weekend of October. It's going to be, I think, always tough. And also, the Bengals have to be the Boston Bobcats that day. I don't know how they're going to play under that moniker.
The Tennessee one sticks out to me as well, and I think the where it's situated on the schedule, when it's situated on the schedule, I guess. You brought up the quarterback situation. That could be an opportune time where the Titans are trying to find themselves, right? If Tannehill's maybe not lighting the world on fire, he's had moments where he has played great football for Tennessee, and he's had, including in the 2021 playoffs against the Bengals where he threw the 3 picks, he's had moments where it's been like, what the hell happened to this guy, right? So, at this point, if there's some early struggles, he's going to be the guy. And you've got now Levis waiting in the wings. I'm sure Titans fans, this just how it goes when there's questions around your quarterback, right? Fans just, team starts to feel the pressure about maybe making a change and that sort of thing. So if there is a slow start by Tennessee, the Bengals may get them at a vulnerable time potentially early in the season, and then maybe they transition to Levis a little later in the season if that's where their season ends up going. And maybe they catch lightning in a bottle late in the year, that sort of thing. I agree with you with the Steelers thing, that even though you feel like if they add pieces or don't add pieces, they're still going to be in the mix regardless. So I don't take that game lightly, but I think that's an opportune time for the Bengals to potentially get them, as opposed to maybe later in the year if and when a quarterback change has happened, or maybe Tannehill gets on a hot streak late in the year as well. I had our buddy Cody Toomey. We got to get him on the show again sometime, chat some ball with him. Fun follow on Twitter, and he does some draft stuff and all kinds of things. He said, he was kind of conversing with me a little bit on Twitter. He said he feels that in those first 6 games, if the Bengals are to have a shot, at least with getting a good draw or a bye or any of that kind of stuff in the playoffs, they need to be 5-1 through that first stretch before the bye. I would say no worse probably than 4-2. And I would say 4-2 is doable. 5-1 would be tough, but I think if you're sitting at the bye at 5-1, you're feeling pretty dang good about things at that point.
I feel like we usually have these conversations every year, and I totally agree with Cody. And that's how we kind of think of these things, because we don't think in absolute worst case or best case scenarios. We try to find ourselves in like the average of things, while the Bengals started the year like 2-3 or whatever, and 4-4
right,
and
right,
rattled off
8
consecutive wins. So like
right.
it really does all matter about like how you finish. But no, I agree. Like it would make it easier if the Bengals were at least two games over 500. But they also just had a track record of just putting together these runs at the end of the season, and you would rather that continue to be the case if the back half of your schedule is going to continue to be tougher. I saw a graph from Warren Sharp, who basically looked at Vegas odds and Vegas projected win totals as a better gauge of like strength of schedule, and just for everyone's schedule from week 9 and on. And the Bengals were I believe, amongst like the 8 or 6 toughest in terms of back half schedule, strength of schedule. So continuing to put together those back half of the season runs and continuing to play winning football in November and December is going to continue to be important. But I agree, the first 6 weeks of the schedule, if I were to identify quote unquote soft spot, it's probably between week 3 and week 5, just because like the Rams, they're just a shell themselves now. We talked about the Titans. The Cardinals, that's probably going to be before Kyler Murray comes back from that torn ACL. Like, I have no idea what that timeline is, but that's going to be October 8th. He suffered that torn ACL, I believe, in like December or like late November, at the very earliest. So I don't foresee him either being back or being close to 100%. I have no idea who the Cardinals' backup is, but like that's the one game I'm looking at. Like, the Bengals should absolutely win this game at Arizona and finish off the first 5 weeks at no absolute worse than 3-2.
That's the hope. I think they've got they had just kind of looking, Colt McCoy, looks like Clayton Tune, maybe David Blau.
Ooh.
Yeah, so a couple names on there. Jeff Driscoll's mentioned there. I don't know if he's still on their roster as well, but those are some of the players on the noted as backup quarterbacks there. We're going to get to listener questions in just a second. I want to say this too. I mean, you look at that, there's an odd dichotomy in those first 6 weeks, because that seems to be I mean, while I said the first month is pretty tough, that seems to be the softer part. Like you said, week 3 through 5, maybe even 6. Who the hell knows who the Seattle Seahawks are going to be this year, right? They surprised everybody last year. I think everybody was resigned to the fact that them trading away Russ was going to give them the number 1 overall pick, and I mean, they made the postseason. So, I mean, it's like crazy. So, again, you look at all of this and you go, okay, well, the first 6 weeks kind of seems to be, I guess, the softer part of the schedule. But like you said, the Bengals haven't played their best ball necessarily the last couple of seasons. At the beginning of the season, it's really going on late runs. So, yeah, I mean, I just feel there's an odd dichotomy here, though, because there's 3 NFC games in those first 6 weeks, but there's also 2 divisional games. So, you gotta kind of take care of business in those first 2 weeks, especially. Especially that home opener against Baltimore. That's going to be a crucial game in week 2. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at with the schedule here. And that the last part here, you mentioned that last part of the schedule right here. Basically, I mean, you could start with San Francisco, but I mean, you could go even, from week 11 on, that's a pretty tough stretch, or you can go week 9 on I mean, so this out of the bye, there's some tough stretches.
It's going to be another testament to, can this team kind of overcome their early season woes that we've just become so accustomed to seeing. Now, obviously, there have been other circumstances that have factored into that. There have been injuries. There's been lack of preseason time and everything. But it's just time to just not come out of the gate looking so sluggish. They've got an opportunity here to just get out in front of the AFC race. And I don't know if the fact that, say they do go 5-1 in the first 6 weeks, I would like to think that wouldn't, soften or lessen the overall aggression to, pull off another late season run. But you just got to make it easier on yourself, because if you're going into the bye week at like 3-3 or 2-4, God forbid, and you have San Francisco and Buffalo, it's not going to be happy times in Cincinnati. There's going to be a ton of pressure on this team while this window, I'm not going to say it continues to close, but continues to get a little bit smaller and smaller. So there's going to be a huge onus on Zach Taylor, the coaching staff, and everyone involved to just get out of the gate hot. And like, the schedule provides them an opportunity to do so if everything goes well.
I just hope too, if they, God forbid, do start slow, I hope the narratives, because last year it was all the narratives of they were frauds last year. They were, making it to the Super Bowl. They were not going to repeat. I hope people actually do a little bit of homework if they do start slow, including ourselves. We may have the propensity to freak out too, but I hope people do some homework and say, look, this is a team that can get really streaky. They get really streaky late in seasons, in the middle of seasons. So if there is a slow start, let's not hit the panic button quite yet. We're going to get to a few questions and then get on out of here. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. And this is the Orange and Black Insider. You can get this show on a variety of platforms, including our YouTube channel. Click the show icon above John to subscribe. Click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And we have our shows on that YouTube channel, as well as 3 and Out from Jason and Kevin. So giving you a lot of different stuff there. You can also get all of the audio side of things, including those 2 shows and others on the Cincy Jungle podcast channel on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all of the major ones. We are there. So subscribe, leave us a review, hopefully a good one. If you are so inclined, we appreciate the support. John, let's get to a couple of questions, unless there are other things on the schedule you think we need to talk about. We've got a question here kind of early in the show from Mark Fry, because you just talked about preseason. Do you think we will play the starters in preseason this year after the slow start we had last year? I think personally that they will play more. I don't think it's going to be substantial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting things to change until I see a change, and I know you've wanted an actual answer with that, but I think their philosophies are pretty set in place, and they have a process, and I think they would want to stick to it. And I don't think it's ever a bad thing by limiting guys' snaps in games that just ultimately don't matter in terms of wins and losses. What might change is, I think Burrow is going to get, he's probably going to get at least Like, he's got 3 career preseason snaps, and like, I think he might play it like a drive actually this time around, whether it's in the first week or the very last week. I think he'll be out there at least for some portion of it, and that would make him more active in one preseason than he has been in 3 other preseasons combined because of other circumstances. Maybe you have an offensive line that's fully put together actually out there for a series, which wasn't the case last year, and that was obviously a huge issue with last year just because there was basically no continuity established entering week 1. Other than that, though, like, I think you'll see more or less the same as you have in years past.
I would agree with you. And I mean, aside from the circumstances around Burrow, this team has attempted to bring in a lot of new people, a lot of new talent via free agency in the draft in 2020, 21, and 22. They've done that. And so, I think that has a lot of the new faces have contributed. So many new faces in new spots has contributed potentially to some of the slow starts as well, combined with the lack of snaps from those new faces. I think, sometimes that'll contribute that. Now, the Bengals this year have some new faces on the defensive side of the ball, but there are a lot of guys starting now that have some starting experience on the offensive line, on defense. So hopefully they do get the work, some work, and avoid injury, but also, those growing pains, if you will, the guys working together for the first time type of stuff gets worked out this year, as opposed to, some new guys on the line, some new guys just around the roster that are out there for the first time. Where are we going next?
Wanted to hit up a question on Twitter from our guy McCarran guy, and he's asking about, well, first of all, some news. Miles Murphy was officially signed today. He signed his 4-year rookie contract, and I believe it was like the quickest first round pick signing the Bengals have had since the start of the new rookie wage scale back in 2011. So he's officially under contract. We had a question about him from McCarran guy. He's asking, with Miles Murphy on the roster, do you think Lou Anarumo will finally stop kicking Joseph Ossai inside? And it's an interesting question, Anthony, because we did see that a little bit during Joseph Ossai's technically rookie year, but first year playing in the Bengals defense. And it wasn't predominantly his overall usage, but I think with Murphy in the fold, you have a guy who's probably more built to handle guards as a pass rusher. But I wouldn't discount Lou still trying to use his pieces as versatile as possible. It may look different in terms of like their NASCAR pass rushing package, if you will, where you have Asai and Hendrickson on the edges, and you have Hubbard and Murphy kicked inside. I'm not sure if Miles Murphy specifically is going to stop Joseph Asai from being used all over the line, but I think it will result in him being used more predominantly on the edge for sure.
That's exactly what I was. First of all, props to McCarran guy. Number one, his avatar or profile pic is Roger Smith from American Dad, and it's Roger Smith as Ricky Spanish, which is a hilarious character on that show. And also props to the name, because McCarran's having himself a hell of a year in the other football league in which he is playing. So kudos to McCarran guy. He's winning on all kinds of accounts here. But no, I agree with you. I think I don't think it'll stop completely for Ossai kicking inside. I think certain things will dictate certain packages, certain movements, and everything. But I think it will lessen it because they'll find different rotations. They've got another guy they can count on here. What I'm curious about, because now we're talking about, the big 4 edge guys, obviously, Hendrickson, Hubbard, Ossai, and now Murphy. Where does this leave a guy like Cam Sample, right? Where it was roles for players like that, roster spots for other players like that. Where does it leave some of these guys? That's where I'm looking at here, because I mean, you got a first round pick now added to the arsenal. Ossai has first round traits. He's got to kind of start putting it all together. It's a big year for him. Started to put things together nicely at the end of the year, despite that penalty in the championship game. But I think the Bengals have a good problem here, and I think to this point here, I don't think it'll stop Ossai kicking inside completely. I think he'll share that responsibility more probably with Murphy, and the Bengals have the ability and flexibility to get a little more creative.
Asai's just a rare athlete, man. Like, he's fast and he's explosive, and in certain situations that can be very advantageous going up against guards and pass protection. Obviously, the less he's in those condensed situations, the better, just because he's on the smart side. But I think you saw flashes as the year kind of went on. He was getting more used to that role. So looking forward to see how it goes.
Our buddy here. Should we sign Justin Houston? That's just a quick one for me right now. No, I think that's an emergency signing. I don't think he's been signed, and neither has Yannick. Right? Has Yannick Ngakwe been signed? Nope. Yeah. So those are guys like, in the event of, I don't even want to say the word INJURY. I think those are emergency calls, and that's probably where a lot of teams are looking for, at those guys to come in potentially late in the summer, or if there's just some other issues, things aren't adding up right now. I don't know about you, John. I don't really see that as where the Bengals go because of the Murphy pick.
Yeah, they signed Basham. That was essentially their equivalent to Justin Houston or Yannick. I'm sure Houston or Yannick want more money than what Basham got, which is essentially at minimum.
Yeah. We had an email, and we'll get to a few more here. This is from a while ago, and I feel bad that we did not address this one. It was kind of more draft centric, but I think part of the question still resonates here, and I think we can provide an answer for it. It was from Kenny, who emailed us a while ago, and Kenny, we apologize not getting to it. He said, "My name is Kenny. I'm a longtime listener who never submitted a question before, so I hope I don't come off stupid." There are no stupid questions, Kenny. I'm a big dummy behind the microphone here, so there are no dumb questions, my friend. What are the realistic expectations of Cordell Volson? Do you guys think they'd be interested in a developmental piece in the draft? And Andrew Voorhees, we know Voorhees unfortunately landed with the Baltimore Ravens, to my great disappointment, late in the draft. And should we expect the Bengals to try running in a wide zone scheme again this year, or rather skip to running straight out of the shotgun? Okay. And then there's also, Deontay Smith question in there too. So there's a lot to break down here. For me, John, the Cordell Volson thing, I think the Bengals not going offensive line in this draft kind of tells you what they think of him and how much they like him. And there were some ups and downs last year, but I mean, I think he gave as much or maybe even more than advertised. He was one of those guys, older, small school. I hate to use the phrase, but maybe not as high of a ceiling, but a high floor guy, right? So I think it would seem they're potentially committed to him. It's more, what are they doing with Jonah at this point? And where does he fit in? Is he going to be the right tackle? Where's Jackson Carman? Are they giving up on that? All of that. But for me, I think what they did and didn't do, I think Volson's in their long-term plans.
Yeah, I don't know if the Bengals were, excuse me, I don't know if they were ever really interested in adding like an interior offensive lineman in the draft. Like they were kind of in on some of the top tackles because there's uncertainty there. But I think Cordell Volson last year was about as good as you could have expected for a day 3 pick who's never played against, top tier competition, to just come in immediately and be the week 1 starter and then play, I think, close to 1,200, 1,300 snaps or something ridiculous like that. So just an incredible workload for him, even if he did play 60 games or so in college. So for him to hold up for an entire 20 or 19 game schedule that the Bengals ended up playing into the playoffs and just be competent, just be okay. There's obviously room for improvement. How much he improves is up for debate, just because he's already 24 and a half, 25 years old. There's not a ton of upside to go when you already enter the league at that age, especially because he's basically already filled out his frame. He's as big as he's going to be. He's athletic as he's going to be. Right. He can get smarter. His technique can improve and whatnot. But still, when you're at that age, your technique is more or less your technique. And they teach those guys in North Dakota State, proper technique. They implement a lot of blocking schemes in general. So his knowledge was already pretty high coming into the league. I think he more or less is who he is. And you can survive with Cordell Volson at left guard. I don't know if he's a guy that you want to extend down the line, but I think he's the unquestioned starter left guard for this year. So they're going to evaluate how he is. They're going to see if he does make that small incremental jump in year 2. It will be needed. It will definitely improve the offensive line, but it's not going to take them to this next tier. I don't think you can expect Cordell Volson to ever be a like notable above average starter at guard, and I don't think you really draft him to be that anyways.
Right. To the other question about the scheme, I think, and you can maybe talk a little bit more to Chase Brown and fitting in with that there. But I mean, the wide zone scheme, they've kept Mixon, and they did not draft a running back until the 5th round. Now, Chase Brown was a pretty good steal at that point. I think he'll bring a lot of value to the team. But I mean, it would seem that your number one, your preference to keep Mixon, the attempt to keep Pirine, and then not drafting a running back until the 5th round would say that they're probably sticking largely to a bit of what they've done before. In previous years, the scheme, the offensive line coach is the same as it's been the past couple of years. So I don't see absolutely wholesale changes here in terms of the scheme. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, we saw that shift last year. Like, it's not good when you just have a negative or 0% success rate doing something schematically. And that's unfortunately what the case was when they had Joe Mixon behind Joe Burrow under center. Defenses just keyed in on exactly what they were going to do. And they didn't have the offensive line overall athleticism to just get out in space like that and create movement and displace guys. And I know that the whole thing with wide zone is it's not really about displacing. It's about stretching out the defense, widening those gaps so you offer cutback lanes to your running back. The running back couldn't find the cutback lanes, whether or not they weren't existent or he just wasn't reading it correctly, and it was just a terrible run game. So when they shifted essentially to the run game that Joe Burrow had at LSU in 2019, like things just got better. The offensive line was better suited to just attack downhill, to attack in duo, to attack an inside zone, just a more vertical style scheme for the offensive line, just because that better fits the athleticism that guys like Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, specifically in that interior trio, they're built for gap scheme style runs. And with Chase Brown coming into the picture, he did a little bit of everything in Illinois. I was interested in how much counter that Illinois ran out of the shotgun, and I think that could be interesting. You could have Volson, Karras, and Kappa, Karras, and Volson pull around the line of scrimmage. That's what Illinois did a lot. I think that would work out of shotgun because they want this whole offense to be based out of the gun because that's where Burrow's the most comfortable with. And when you have a running back who's comfortable reading his gaps out of that alignment, it obviously allows you to do what you want to do. I think in their mind, though, like they want to just be able to do everything at least at a base competent level. I don't know if they can do wide zone at that anymore, especially because I don't really see Orlando Brown as that type of blocker anyways. I think he just fits in with that vertical run scheme and just attacking the gaps like that. So I wouldn't expect wide zone to be their base run scheme anymore. Like they're just all in the shotgun now. Yeah,
I guess. Yeah. I mean, you've kind of talked me out of my stance on that a little bit. I think they because like I said, the figurehead pieces are there that have been trying to run this scheme for the past couple of years. I think they will try to run it. I don't know if they're going to try and run it by bashing their head against the wall like they did for weeks and weeks and weeks last year at the beginning of the year until they made the change. But I think they're going to try to run those concepts probably in conjunction with, running out of shotgun and gap scheme stuff. So, you've kind of talked me out of my initial stance on that a little bit with your astute analysis, my friend. But no, I mean, I still think that's going to be part of what they want to do. And who knows also, might some teams start to watch late season film of the Bengals this year in terms of run, what they were doing in the run game. And maybe that becomes something where they have a little more trouble running the ball out of shotgun because teams have looked at that as opposed to making that kind of mid-season change. When did they really shift? I'm trying to think. When did they really shift that? Was that the big Carolina game with Mixon or
It was week 5. I remember they ran Mixon almost exclusively out of shotgun in that Ravens game, and it was still it wasn't pretty, but it was still better than what the first 4 weeks were because they were just abysmal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, now that's ringing a bell on that. But they didn't. They started it then. It wasn't all every run, but it was much more frequent, and then I think it slowly evolved into what became kind of a staple more late in the year. But at any rate. Any other questions you want to get to before we hop on out of here, my friend?
We could do just a quick,
Win
short,
loss.
sweet. Yeah, if you want.
Okay. Well, let's pull that back up then, because I think some people have already. Let me see if I can pull that back up. I will pull the graphic back up. What's your? I mean, talk to me while I pull this up. What's your gut feeling on? I mean, are we looking at a team here? Actually, you know what? There's a question here. And this, I thought this was maybe it was from Dan the Man. I got to see it. I think it was basically, do you? Yeah, here it is right here. Given our losses, Hurst, Bell, Bates, and our additions, free agents, draftees, more experienced young players, and oh, by the way, higher athletic players potentially, do you think we will be a better team by the end of the season than last year? By how much? So that ties in well to a record prediction. Let's kind of start there, and then I'll pull the graphic up and we can check it out.
Yeah, I think because Jesus, Hurts, Bell, and Bates are your biggest, most notable losses.
Hurst.
Yeah.
Hurst.
Oh, I'm tired, guys. Samaje Perine, I don't think can be discounted either, but you probably replaced him the most effectively with Chase Brown because Chase Brown's going to come in immediately. I guess you can call Irv Smith and Hayden Hurst kind of 1-for-1 too. Your biggest downgrade at the moment is safety, just because you have no idea what that position group looks like. You have no idea what they're going to be at the beginning of the season. They could definitely improve as the season goes on, but right now that's you lost, I think, at least 3,000 something snaps in terms of starting defensive backs, and over 2,000 is at the safety room. So that's the biggest area of weakness. Everywhere else, you can make the easy argument that they are the same, if not better than last year. But every team falls into this fallacy, right? Every team doesn't actually improve after year and year. There's always going to be teams that regress, but there was still a lot of things that the Bengals could have improved on from last year. They still had to make an offense work behind an offensive line that was still pretty much below average for the most part, especially after the beginning of the season. I think you have better depth at receiver. I think you're pretty much better at defensive line. You have better depth there as well. You have really good depth at cornerback, even though, again, the secondary wasn't necessarily a weakness last year. So in those very important areas, like, you're probably better, and your high-end talent is the same. They're all still in their prime. I think you could definitely make the argument that this team is more talented. It's just about sustaining success year after year. That just gets tough, and you add more variables on top of it, more things that you can't predict, just more randomness, and that obviously gets in the way of stacking up 10 plus win seasons over and over again. But this team is built to do it more than pretty much 90% of the NFL.
Yeah, and it's also the variables of which teams on their schedule have regressed or progressed, right? I mean, that's always the question. We can sit here and say, oh, the Buffalo Bills look like world beaters, so do the Steelers, all that, and then inevitably there are teams that just aren't as strong, and there are some teams that sneak up on you, and they kind of catch fire. So, I mean, that's part of the equation here. I will say this: while I agree with the notion of really having some big questions at safety, I do think the addition of Murphy and, to a lesser extent, Basham, getting more consistent pass rush, getting better pass rush. I think there's going to be a fire lit under Osai, given how his year ended last year, not only him playing well, but also the heartbreak at the end. I think that having an improved pass rush is going to make things easier, as the old adage goes, on the secondary, on the safeties potentially there. So I think that helps. And I think, like you said, they're improved there. I think there are some areas where there are questions, but what they have done is they have drafted or brought in guys with high athletic profiles, for the most part, that give you high potential to either reach back or beyond what you had with these losses that are mentioned here. So I think the potential is there for them definitely to be better. I think there are growing pains to withstand. You got to figure out the offensive line and get them to be consistent. Yeah, I mean, I hope our guy Orlando Brown Jr. brings a big level of consistency there. You got to figure out right tackle, obviously, but I think once you figure that out, once you're able to regularly get after the quarterback with guys not named Hendrickson or Hubbard, I think you can have a pretty good mix of things if you shore up both of those lines. And I think the Bengals have done a pretty good job of that the past couple of off seasons. So let's look at the schedule as we said. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. Why
okay,
not?
go for it. Go for it.
10-7 one year, 12-4 the next year. Could have potentially been 13-4 had that game actually counted. I think that's probably the range that you're looking at, but I don't want to discount this team going 14-3. Like I think they are legitimately that good, and I don't think. I mean, the schedule pretty much falls smack dab in the middle in terms of ease or hardness or whatever you want to call it. Right? It's not a daunting schedule by any means, but it's definitely no cupcakes. Right? It's right in the middle, and the Bengals should be favored in probably at least 10 or 11 of these games at minimum, right? So if everything just happens the way we expect it to, you're looking at a baseline of about 11 wins. I think 12-5 just sounds the most correct to me right now because again, 14-3 I think is completely doable, and that sounds pretty homerish to say just because that's a really good record. That's probably going to get them the number one seed. But I want to just stress the fact that that's definitely in reach now. This is year 3 of this core grouping all together. They've experienced obviously massive success in these past 2 years. They're ready to build off that. I don't think that there's like obvious regression like plastered all over this team in some of those important areas. They've managed to get better at a lot of things, but you can't expect everything to go right. You can't expect everything to click. You can't expect to beat all the teams that you expect to be. Some things will happen, and I think the fact that this team specifically has handled adversity very well in ways that we haven't expected, it gives them that benefit of the doubt. But still, I think some things it won't happen exactly as we envisioned it. So I'm going to say 12-5.
By the way, peep the edited jersey on T. Higgins down here. We're rocking the number 5. I just noticed that. I'm with you on that. So let me ask you this then. Let's just you went with 12-5, right?
Yeah.
With a 12-5 record, what do you foresee their record in the division being if they have 5 total losses? Do you have them splitting with each team? Do you have them going 4-2? I assume you're not having them go 2-4. That would mean they beat pretty much everybody else. So, just spitfiring. Would you say they split it or go 4-2 with a 12-5 record?
Yeah, they're 4-2 and 3-3. Like it would do them great. Like I think we talked about this on Wednesday. It would definitely benefit them if they actually ended up with a winning record in the AFC North. To win the AFC North 3 consecutive years. And to not like have like one of them be like a sweep or like a 5-1 year, like that's very impressive, and it's a testament to their success outside of the division. The division is just going to be as good, if not better, than it was last year. Like the Steelers have improved. I think you're going to get better quarterback play from the Browns quarterback. I think you're going to see a healthier Ravens team this time around. All of those teams are gunning for the division right now, but they're still all behind the Bengals in a lot of respects. So I'm going to say probably 4-2 in the division, I would say.
Yeah, last year I predicted. I think I wrote something up on Cincy Jungle, and I think I had the Bengals either going 4-2 or 3-3 in the division, splitting. I can't really remember, but I got just crushed for that, and that's what that's ended up with. It's not an indictment of a weak Bengals team. It's a compliment to the strengths of the other teams in the division, right? I mean, that's just kind of what it is. So I see a potential of this team. I mean, I think the talent is there. I think they got to grow up pretty quickly to get, with some of these new pieces or rookies, all of that. They got to grow up pretty quickly to be able to get to 14, 15 wins on this schedule. But I see it more in your range. I would see more 11-12 wins. I think, there's just some teams that are difficult on this schedule and maybe they're not as familiar with. I'm looking directly at San Francisco in that respect. I think there's some tough games. There are some pendulum swings from some others. I don't know how good the Minnesota Vikings are going to be. I don't know if the Jacksonville Jaguars will be able to repeat what they did last year. We think they will. We think both of those will be strong teams. We just don't know. I see them splitting in the division as well. I think they take one each there. So there's 3 losses there. And then, maybe there's another 2 or 3 sprinkled throughout the schedule there. So that would put them at what, either 12-5 or 11-6, right? So that's probably where I have them. Probably division champs again, maybe if you're on the 11 side of things, maybe that doesn't get you the division crown, but into the wild card. But I think the potential for a 14-15 win, I think this team is that good when healthy and when clicking right. It's just, I think there are some tough spots on the schedule. I think the division's going to be really tough. And so I'm going to go more 11-12 wins for this team. The big question for you, John, in your 12-5 assessment, do you have them winning this one, the big week 17 matchup against the Chiefs? Do you think they win that one?
You got to ask me in January or December.
All right. Okay.
But I will say, because Brandon Houdayer 85 brings up a great point. No AFC North team has ever won the Division 3 consecutive years. And I'm probably going to go back and forth on this. Like, I could easily see the Ravens winning the division. It's just really hard to go back to back to back when every team is so tightly contested and so close with one another. And again, I think the Ravens are going to be better. And you could just say that they're due for that. And that's just where my brain wants me to take me. But this team has just continued to pleasantly surprise me again and again, despite acknowledging how good that they continue to be. So yeah, I could see them being a wild card. I could also see them being the number 1 seed. Regardless, it's going to be a good outcome.
You got to think also, what were they last year? Were they 12-5 last year?
12-4,
right? Yeah, 12-4. Thank you. Yes. So 12-4 last year. Obviously, the terrible situation with the Bills game. You mentioned that looked like that was maybe headed towards a win. You also take into account the first 2 games of that season as well. The wacky one against Pittsburgh that probably should have been a win if not for a freak injury to the long snapper, and then barely losing to Dallas after playing like dog crap, really, the better part of that game, but barely losing that one on the last second field goal. You're talking about a team now that potentially could have had, shoulda, woulda, coulda, 13-15 wins last year instead of 12. So, I think you take that stuff into account, and then that's where you say, okay, well, maybe a couple of bounces, not weird injuries going the other way, and you've got a team that's, in that 14-15 win range this year. We'll see, though. This has been a long one, but it's been a fun one. I appreciate your time, John. I know you're a busy guy, and you've given a lot this week. I appreciate it. Good, sir. This has been a fun one. And anything you want to add before we hop on out of here?
Rookie numbers also just came out with the rookie class. Yep. Miles Murphy, we knew he was going to be 99. DJ Turner, good choice at 20. He's fast. You need to be fast toward number 20. 30 for Chase Brown. I guess I can live with it. Yeah, but I think he's fine with it. Jordan Battle, 27. Again, could be worse. Kind of a weird number for a safety. Who am I forgetting? There's a 4th round pick in there. Charlie Jones, 15. Like you said, he's Chris Henry 2.0. Hopefully better than John Ross when he first started his career at number 15. Andre Josevich, number 80. I think is perfect for him. He's just a long stride vertical threat that makes a lot of sense. Kevin Huber, 2.0. Number 10. Brad Robbins at punter. Poor one for DJ Ivy. A center and cornerback, number 38. He might as well not.
Yeah, 38.
Camp.
Yeesh. Yeah, that's not a great number. Not a great number. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions. Sorry if we didn't get to some. We appreciate you tuning in, whether it's live or after the fact. But this has been our scheduled reaction show and listener questions live. We haven't done a listener questions one in a while. We're sorry about that. We'll do more. We're going to do better. We're going to do better. But thank you all. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there early on here.
Thank you, Mom.
Mother's Day to yes. Thank you, Mom. And we will see you very soon. Talking more Cincinnati Bengals, and get the show on YouTube. Click the Cincy Jungle click the thumbs up on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, and get the audio files on your favorite audio streamer. All of the Cincy Jungle podcasts on your favorite streamer, as well as going and checking out my guy's site, A2ZSports.com. John doing some great work covering the Bengals and AFC North there. Take care, everybody. We will see you soon again. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Talk to you later.